Yes. I'm Kevin Deckingo with the League of American Bicyclists. You're joining us for our bi-monthly webinar series this month. This session is How I Accidentally Started Bike Lane Uprising, a conversation with Christina Whitehouse of Bike Lane Uprising, and I'll bring her on in just a moment. Um, Bike Lane Uprising, for those who aren't aware, is the mobile app and movement to ensure bike lane safety for all users, and we can't wait to have her on. Before we get started, though, just a few quick reminders. The session is being recorded and will be added to our YouTube channel later. You can find this recording and all the webinars from all the other webinars in our series at bikeleague.org/webinars. While all attendees are muted, we do want to hear from you. So feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A function anytime, and we'll get those during the Q&A function after the presentation. Closed captions are available, so please don't hesitate to turn those on. Okay. All right, before we dive in, I do want to introduce the League of American Bicyclists. We are the national grassroots bicycle advocacy organization leading the movement to create a bicycle-friendly America for everyone. Going back to our origins in 1880 is the campaign to pave city streets for bicycling. Our work at the League is all about making biking safer and more accessible for everyone, from downtown office commutes to far-flung gravel adventures and everything in between. The League enacts change in a variety of ways. We guide cities, universities, and businesses with our expert resources to make their places better for biking through our Bicycle Friendly America program. We empower advocates at the National Bike Summit and in programs like the webinar series year-round to make them better at making the case and more impactful in making bicycle-friendly places. We strengthen bike education by creating the gold standard bike education curriculum while we license and train and ensure League cycling instructors all across the country who share and empower students with the knowledge and confidence to ride safely. And lastly, of course, we lobby Congress and build a coalition in Washington, D.C. around bicycling to ensure that cycling is safe and accessible to everyone. All right. I do want to say thank you to all of our National Bike Summit sponsors this year for helping to make the summit and our year-long webinar series possible. And I'd like to bring Christina Whitehouse into the into the Zoom. After starting as a passion project, Bike Lane Uprising spread via word of mouth and is now available in all US and Canadian cities. Founder Christina Whitehouse was named a Chicagoan of the Year, as well as one of the 50 most influential people in American cycling. And Bike Lane Uprising was named one of the top 8 biking orgs in North America by Momentum magazine. Heidi Stevens of Chicago Magazine says of Christina, in a city that often pits cars against cyclists, where ghost bikes punctuate the landscape, Whitehouse has galvanized a movement and created policy change, all by refusing to back down. Just ask those politicians, many of whom have joined the cause. I love that. Thanks so much for joining us, Christina. And while Christina's speaking, if you have questions or want to chat, just use the chat function and we'll get to those at the end. Thanks, Christina.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I am going to share my screen. And then let me know when you can see, and I'm going to go full screen mode. Good?
See it.
Awesome. All right. Some folks on the call may or may not be aware of what Bike Lane Uprising is. So this should give you a pretty good overview. Some people know the core of what we do, and then there's probably a lot more that you might not know that we do. So what started out as a thing that I tried hiding on the internet is no longer hidden on the internet. It spread via word of mouth, and it has made local and national news outlets. It's been pretty incredible to witness just how far it's gone and how far it's continuing to go. As mentioned, I was named as one of the 50 most influential people in American cycling, and I feel like there's a connotation and stereotype that goes along with that, that maybe I'm athletic and, really sporty. I'm not. I just like making things. And I think it's my background in design and user centered development that actually made me influential in the biking sphere. And to be named one of the top 8 biking orgs in the US and Canada is kind of crazy, considering we don't actually have any funding. A lot of folks think that we're just this large entity and we have staff and all of that. We're a volunteer group, and we're really scrappy, and we've just been keeping this alive year over year. And yeah, Chicagoan of the Year. That was pretty crazy. I remember when I moved to Chicago, it just seemed like such a large city. So to be, named as somebody that has had some sort of a positive impact on the city does mean a lot. And here are my qualifications of how I became the founder of Bike Lane Uprising. I didn't own a bicycle. And in the beginning, everyone wanted to, have photos of me next to a bike. So the only photos in the beginning were me with divvies, because all I did was use share bikes. And the bike in the prior photo was actually just some product placement. It's one of my friends that builds bikes. I wasn't actually a part of the biking community. Again, I was just riding Divvy and using it for transportation. I was not a software developer. I was not a marketer. I really don't enjoy using social media, particularly in my personal life, and I really wasn't political. So when you look at Bike Lane Uprising and you see that as being my, resume, it doesn't really seem to be like the most likely fit. And frankly, out of everybody I know, I was probably the least likely of people to start something like this. But as like many of you, I was nearly run over in a bike lane in downtown Chicago. This is the photo of the truck that was involved. And the driver almost ran me over in a bike lane downtown Chicago, which was named the #1 city for biking that year. And I used both of my hands to push myself off of the side of the truck to prevent me from going under the back wheels. I thought that maybe the driver didn't know what had happened, and that maybe I was just, in their blind spot and they had no idea. So I chased after them. I caught up with them a few blocks later as they were just about ready to go under Lower Wacker. They were stopped at a stoplight, and I got him to roll down the window, and I asked him, I was like, "Do you realize that you almost ran me over?" I thought that he would be surprised. I thought he would be shocked. I thought that, me just telling him that would be enough to scare him to be safer that day. And he just stone faced said, "Yeah, you did know." And I tried reaching out to the company. I tried, seeing what avenues with the city I had to, like let people know what had happened. And what I realized is that there wasn't a way to report it, and that, the city was set up for bicyclists to not share how dangerous our commutes were. And the company didn't care. They never let me get past their receptionist. And 2 weeks afterwards, the first share bike rider in the nation was killed in Chicago, and the circumstances to what had happened to me were really similar. And we were also about the same age, and, both involved in grad school and all of that, and we were both on divvies. And, I very much realized that I could have been Ginny. So I started kind of noodling with just like learning more about bike lane obstructions and just like what other bicyclists were going through. So when I graduated, I was used to working full time and going to grad school full or part time. So once grad school ended, I was like, oh, I need something to do with all my, extra time. So I had this idea that maybe there would be other bicyclists that would want to report bike lane obstructions so that we could highlight where these problems were occurring. And as I started to reach out to bicyclists, I kept on hearing the same quote over and over. And it was, I feel like nobody cares. I feel like no one cares. I feel like no one cares. And because of that, bicyclists were taking matters into their own hands and they were vandalizing vehicles. They were getting in physical altercations with drivers. And it was just a really explosive situation. So, as many of the folks on this call know, only a small percentage of streets have any designation for bicyclists whatsoever. And oftentimes that designation is, a faded, you can barely see it bike lane, maybe some sharrows on the streets, maybe there's curb protected bike lanes, maybe there's off street trails. But those bike lanes that, that are a part of that number are being used as, free parking by drivers. They're being used as extra travel lanes. They're, filled with construction, debris. They're not being cleaned or maintained throughout the year. And they're being used as distribution centers by companies. And then comes Bike Lane Uprising. So the idea was that we could create one central database and we could allow bicyclists the ability to report the things that they were experiencing. So bike lane obstructions, unsafe lane conditions, and from that we could aggregate all that information and try to, find some good or find some insights and ways that we could chip away at the problem. So bicyclists, they sign up, they can document a bike lane obstruction through photos. You don't have to have a photo, but if you do have a photo, the mobile app will extract information from that photo and make it easier to submit. So it'll fill in date, time, location, license plate information, and from that, that is uploaded to our live database. The live database is updated, I want to say like every couple of minutes. And then it's also added to our map. So you can start to see where hotspots are occurring and you can click around through the different types of maps. But what we're also seeing is that a lot of these companies that are obstructing bike lanes, they're not just doing it in one city, they're doing it across the nation. And we're also seeing that, a lot of the entities that you would think are supposed to be keeping us safe and maintaining clear bike lanes, like police, are often some of the most egregious with obstructing the bike lanes themselves. So the question that always comes up is what happens with the data? And the long answer is that it kind of depends on what we're able to do with it. What we were able to do with bike lane obstructions when we first started was smaller than what we've been able to do with it today. And we're continuing to grow that opportunity for that data. We do try to find, avenues that are forward thinking, that are, moving the needle forward. So our data and our maps and, just our advocacy has been used to get infrastructure improvement. So actual physical bike lanes, improved with the city. Our hotspots, we've seen, when we've identified hotspots, within, a couple of weeks, we've actually seen some, flex posts or things, added to those areas. We've worked to get laws passed. We've created education programs specifically to drivers. There's been enforcement of hotspots on the data that we have. And we can also identify repeat offenders, which is something that's kind of unique to our data set and how we're collecting the data. Our data has been used in court cases where bicyclists have been injured or killed. And it's also creating these national statistics. So what started in Chicago as this thing that I tried hiding on the internet is no longer just in Chicago. It's spread outside of Chicago. And from that, we're able to see like what's unique about different cities and what's, not unique about cities. So when bike lane obstructions are added, they're added to our database. They automatically end up in our live database feed. And right now, I think we're over 100,000 bike lane obstructions, which is crazy. Our data more than doubled in 2.5 years. And that was after we had to go down and let people know that we were back up and running again. And then we went down again last summer so that we could rebuild everything. So even with all that disruption, we've more than doubled our data in 2.5 years. Our maps, you can, zoom into different cities. You can change the map type. So we have 3 map types. There's the heat map, which I think is kind of the closest to kind of get straight into like, these are some problem areas. But then the cluster map and the pinpoint map allow you to see some, trends, especially if it's like a city that might not have as many bike lane obstructions. And then also the pinpoint and the cluster map allow you to actually see individual photos of those bike lane obstructions that are reported. You can filter by different cities. You can also filter by obstruction type. And the calculations that you see on the left, those are updated automatically. So our maps update about every 3 hours. So those calculations are updating every 3 hours. And as you flip from one city to the next, you'll see those calculations update based on that city's, submissions. The data that we collect, we go for qualitative data more so than quantitative data. While yes, 100,000 bike lane obstructions is a lot, we get really rich data with what's being submitted. We're getting photos, we're getting notes, we're getting, geospatial, information. And we can apply that to other data sets and we can see some trends that are happening. So what you're seeing here is us applying that data to different wards and bike lane types and year over year changes and what we're seeing from that. And that's something that is helpful in understanding like what's changing with maybe our users, but then also what's changing with the landscape. And one thing that always comes about is that people think that more bike lane obstructions for one location means it's reported or that it's more dangerous, that it's happening more so. And I argue that it's actually the opposite. So oftentimes if an area is so incredibly dangerous or the infrastructure is just abysmal, you're really not going to get many bike lane obstructions because bicyclists are trying to get through there as fast as humanly possible. It is so unsafe that they don't want to be in that location any longer than they have to. And also the infrastructure is so poor that they don't even see it as infrastructure, like a sharrow. How many people are going to report a sharrow, right? But the city counts sharrows as bike lanes. And the more egregious a bike lane obstruction is, so like think a curb protected bike lane or an off-street trail being blocked by like a driver or something like that, it's more likely that it's going to be submitted to our database. So that's one misnomer that tends to come up. So again, we've collected over 100,000 bike lane obstructions to date. For context, that's easily like $15 to $45 million in unrealized tickets and fines. Oftentimes the reports that are being submitted are from, construction or, things that are there like year round, entities just kind of illegally taking over the space, maybe, a location plowing snow into the bike lane. Those are things to where the fines can actually be hundreds, if not like thousands of dollars, and they actually require the company to show up in court. And that fine is set by the judge. So I would say 15 to 45 million is a very conservative number. Okay, so there are 6 different types of bike lane obstructions that can be submitted to our database. And essentially the main takeaway is like, if it makes the lane unsafe, then report it. You can also do like broken bollards, faded paint, stuff like that. But so I'm going to teach you what a bike lane obstruction is. This is a private owner bike lane obstruction. This usually gets some chuckles, and people always think like, oh, wow, they made a horrible mistake and they tried getting out of that bike lane as fast as humanly possible. That is incorrect. They drove 3 more blocks. So they had the opportunity to exit 3 times and they just kept on going. We see commercial, vehicles, so companies that are obstructing bike lanes. Sometimes it's for like an actual emergency or maintenance, but a lot of the times it's just those companies are getting really used to and cozy using bike lanes as a way for them to stage their work sites. We see taxis, Ubers, Lyfts, liveries, ride shares. And you can see in this particular instance, a delivery vehicle on a contraflow bike lane in the winter. and the bike lane is actually also covered in ice. So a multitude of things that are going to create a challenge for the bicyclist to safely get around. And the vehicles on the other side, they're not going to be expecting them. And we also see municipal and government vehicles that are obstructing bike lanes. And they tend to be the most egregious. They tend to be the most aggressive towards bicyclists. They tend to have the most entitlement to their behavior. So, this always gets some chuckles. Oh, it's the police going in and getting, Baskin Robbins, Dunkin' Donuts. This is actually a hotspot on the map for police officers doing this, and they've been reported many times coming out with donut bags in their hands. And it gets chuckles even from companies. And what I share is like, okay, everyone thinks this is funny, but what kind of brand degradation does it do for companies when they're also obstructing bike lanes? Construction has proven to be deadly for bicyclists, and unfortunately, the city themselves tend to not put a lot of thought and care into how to maintain safe bike lanes and safe travel for bicyclists on artery bike lanes, especially. So, this is actually the Illinois Department of Transportation's work site, and they're not actually doing construction on this street. They're actually doing it on the highway and some of the easements and stuff over to the side. And what you don't realize is that there's actually legal free parking all along the other side that they're just choosing not to use, but they're all completely filling in the bike lane. There's debris all over in the bike lane. There's multiple, double, triple, quadruple, parking. And under this highway is actually parking for like at least like a few blocks. So they're choosing not to use the parking that is available, and they're just commandeering bike infrastructure. Now, again, the Department of Transportation's their task is to keep people safe on our roads, and they tend to only think about one type of user group. Again, we see maintenance issues. So you can see this particular instance, at nighttime, you're just not going to see that. Water, we're highlighting that water can cause a lot of damage. We're starting to see where some of that's happening around the cities. A lot of the times this will freeze and then it's becoming a black ice skating rink, incredibly dangerous. And snow removal is just not happening. These are things that you can also report. And trash cans and glass. And these are all things that cause bicyclists to exit the bike lane. And it allows us to prove, that lanes just aren't being maintained, right? So all this data comes in, and we became a little bit of a hub and an advocacy space and, just a voice for the biking community. We have been in contact with a variety of different entities over the years, and that seems to be growing and expanding year over year. And some of them, we work with directly. Sometimes we work with them indirectly, but just the scope of who we're, starting to communicate and having some sort of a influence and just conversation with is definitely growing. And our data. So when we were very, very new, and I think it was Chicago and DC were the only cities reporting to Bike Lane Uprising. Some folks in Nashville reached out and they asked to be added to the database so that Nashville bicyclists would be able to report it. And we allowed them. We, built it so that they could start submitting bike lane obstructions. And in like the very first or second year of them being around, they had accumulated enough bike lane obstructions for one location that they used our maps to advocate for infrastructure in this very clear red hotspot. And I think it was last summer I went there. We did like an event with them, and they were actually installing physical infrastructure in Nashville because of our maps at that point in time. So that was pretty cool. And there's cities that are starting to catch on. So a lot of folks thought we were just Chicago based for the longest time, that only people in Chicago could submit to our database. That is not true. We're just really well known in Chicago, so that you just tend to hear Chicago things through us. But as an example, Denver started submitting to our database. They started getting the word out. We did a virtual presentation like this, and things just kind of exploded. And it definitely started to get the attention of both the bicyclists in Denver, as well as city officials and the news in Denver. And that all happened just within a couple of, I would say, months. Our data, we oftentimes, if folks don't realize that we have an actual mobile app for reporting bike lane obstructions, some folks can have the misnomer that, oh, it's just a social media account, right? So our social media accounts do have a decent amount of attention. Back in the heyday of Twitter, we had a lot of traction through there, and we were able to get quite a bit of things done just through our Twitter account. But bicyclists submit these bike lane obstructions. Oftentimes we can add them to social media and get attention to particularly like kind of egregious issues. This one instance, there was a landscape company that had been reported to our database before. We, shared that, it had happened again, and it was now in a curb protected bike lane. These curbs just get destroyed. And it ended up on social media, got quite a bit of attention. We then used that as the launch pad of our training program. So we actually have created a training program to teach fleet drivers all the things we would want to know if we were them about, bike lane laws, rules, best practices, you name it. And we held it at their office. So they were the first ones through it. We turned a social media post into emails, into, phone calls, into video calls, into them allowing us to survey their employees to figure out things that they would want to know. And we really use that to build the content. And we went through every single bike lane obstruction that had been submitted about their company, and we went through line by line by line. We shared, this is the bike lane obstruction, this is where it was on a map, and then this is where you could have parked instead. And it definitely hit home for them. So it wasn't just us, kind of wagging our finger and being like, these are the rules, follow the rules. It was like, here, like, this is what's happening. We taught them, things that reduce risk, things that take away, that add to the risk. And we, I was surprised how animated and interactive it became once we started sharing their bike lane obstructions. It definitely got the point across. And because we have this rich data set, because we're able to tag these bike lane obstructions with the actual root cause of the entity that was involved with the obstruction, because we can show these repeat offenders and we can search by company name and USDOT numbers and all of this, we can do really unique things with that, one of which being this training. And we ran 2 sessions. It went really well. One of the guys from the first session, who was a little standoffish, this guy right here, actually came to the second session too, and was like the biggest net promoter and telling everybody they needed to pay attention, and it was really good. And, so that was kind of the case to believe. But we're now going to be running more of these, and we're hoping to really expand that program. Our platform, just as a whole, though, in the beginning, I said I didn't want to do any of the advocacy work, and I just wanted to kind of deal with the data side of things because that's more of what I'm used to. But our platform did become a gateway for community engagement. We also ended up taking on ghost bikes and vigils in Chicago. The ghost bike that we did for Gerardo on Lakeshore Drive and Balboa is probably one of the most well-known ghost bikes around. And it's actually been cited as one of the reasons why a very large infrastructure change is potentially going to happen in Chicago. So Chicago is looking to bury Lakeshore Drive in that area of the city, specifically because Gerardo's ghost bike has been hit so many times. And again, our advocacy, because we have all of these accounts, because we have so much engagement with users, we're able to, kind of harness that and get more just eyes on some of these challenges that bicyclists are facing. We also have funded 7,000 sets of bike lights through our platform. And 7,000 bike lights, that seems like a lot, right? But the thing that kind of sets everything apart is that they're like nice bike lights, and that they're bike lights that, you know, we would feel comfortable biking with. So, and they last a really long time. Over the years, we've worked to make them nicer and nicer and nicer. And again, 7,000 sets of them have been funded through our followers and just given away out on the streets to people that need them. We also created an advocacy cohort. When I started Bike Lane Uprising, again, I wasn't a part of the biking community, and I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know how the system worked. And I also didn't really have anybody to go to ask for support. And if anything, I actually had some contentious relationships with organizations that were already in place. They did not want Bike Lane Uprising to exist. And from the advocacy cohort, we kind of do the whole system based on this methodology, right? It's based on how we've done our work, but essentially we identify a problem or a call to action. It needs to be really clear and concise and to the point. It needs to illustrate the community's size and weight. So if we want people to care about this issue, we have to show that a lot of people care about this issue already, right? So then we raise awareness in the news. We tend to be in the news a lot. And then that news like starts to raise awareness with the general population. So instead of it just being the bicycling community, we have to get more people to care about this issue. And then from that, that starts to force political leaders to pay attention, because if they're seeing that, hey, a large part of my, you know, constituents care about this issue, I need to care about this issue too. And then they're going to start to put pressure or give leeway to city departments to start prioritizing the, you know, the biking related issues. And then, you know, hopefully from that, safer biking conditions are built. And then the safer it is to bike, the more people are going to bike. And then that builds like momentum. And then you're able to then take off a larger problem to, you know, go after, and then kind of continue through the flywheel. Things that I've learned so far, there is no silver bullet solution to solving bike lane obstructions. It's kind of like a knot in your hair. Like you can't just go straight for the center of it. You have to kind of start unraveling it and just kind of grab at anything that's gonna, you know, help make it better. And that starts to build momentum, and it just starts to get traction. But I have realized that, and this is just a principle of just like user-centered design, is that, you know, by better understanding the problem, you can start to identify unique solutions. And that's what we've done, right? We've gone after things that maybe people aren't doing. And again, our data has been used to allow, you know, cities to really focus on where infrastructure and enforcement might need to be. Resources are really tight right now in the, you know, the political landscape. We know that funds are really, really tight. So it allows cities to be judicious with their efforts. Again, we've helped to get multiple laws passed, and our data shows who's blocking bike lanes. So as an example, you know, the prior mayor of Chicago had to, on record in committee multiple times, make comment about why she was obstructing bike lanes. She had gone grandstanding about, you know, all the great work she had done, but yet, you know, multiple people had been killed that year and she really hadn't done anything. And then she was reported to our database for obstructing bike lanes to go and get donuts. And this was the front page newspaper story on every single newspaper in Chicago, because it was just such an about face to everything that, you know, she was saying, you know, on her stump speeches. Our data led to the Office of the Inspector General doing some investigative work into bike lane obstructions, specifically those created by the City of Chicago employees or lack of maintenance to bike lanes. And early on, our data showed a correlation between companies that park in bike lanes and them later being involved in a fatality or injury of a bicyclist. And it started incredibly early on. I did not realize that that was going to happen, nor did I anticipate it would happen so early. And, Angela Park, she was a mother of two, triathlete. She was killed in her own neighborhood by a company that had been reported to our database 17 times that year. And again, that was when we first started. So most people didn't even know what Bike Lane Uprising is or was. And it was really hard to submit to our database. Like, it was kind of crazy that anybody was submitting to our database. But again, the day after, they ran her over and killed her, they were reported for being aggressive with bicyclists. So some companies care and some don't, and some want to change their behavior and some don't. But our data can be used to kind of just put a mirror up to the situation and show proof for bicyclists. Our data has been used in court cases involving bicyclists that have been injured or killed. And I expect that to continue to rise. In this particular situation, little girl Lily Shanbrook was killed while biking with her parents in Chicago on a neighborhood greenway. ComEd, the utility company, was illegally obstructing the bike lane on a greenway. And when the parents went around the illegally obstructing vehicle, they were clipped by the driver of a semi that was also on a neighborhood greenway. And Lily was killed instantly. And based on what I could see that, ComEd was involved. And years prior, we had actually, tweeted at ComEd, letting them know that they were not only obstructing bike lanes, but their drivers were really aggressive. And, we even said, prevent ghost bikes. And they acknowledged receipt of that tweet. They said that, they would be, doing something about it. And we let them know that it wasn't just that isolated incident, that this was a larger issue, that they had been submitted over 20 times already. And it was something where training really needed to be incorporated into their training, like their employment training. And unfortunately, they didn't do anything. And it doesn't feel good being the one on the news advocating for the families afterwards. What I would prefer our data to be used for is for preventative measures. We're already seeing that our data is connected to, hey, like where there's smoke, there's fire, and companies that obstruct bike lanes, are now predisposed for being involved in these tragedies. And we believe that the data that we have can be used to change the behavior. And that's why we've created the training program. And that's why we're also creating our sister site, Uprise, that's really going to be targeted towards fleet risk managers and really providing them tools to change behaviors of their fleet, of their driving force. So Uprise is a place to aggregate transportation data, large scale, big data sets. So think, Bike Lane Uprising, bicyclists submit bike lane obstructions. We have other data sets that are available, and then we aggregate everything together in this thing called Uprise, and we provide, different tools and things for, think like fleet risk managers, you name it, but, providing reports, providing, data that they can, kind of see how things are going at their company, how they compare to other entities. And obviously, like, we just realized that there isn't anything happening as far as training and educating when it comes to drivers' understanding of what bike lane laws are, best practices. But we think, we're really maintaining Uprise and really building it towards being for fleet risk managers. So, really going straight to the source of entities that we think that could have the biggest impact. A lot of the vehicles that we're seeing are these very, very large vehicles. They have the potential to do the greatest amount of harm. And, obviously, if we build this for fleet risk managers, there's going to be some use cases to where maybe insurance companies also find it useful. Maybe lawyers, our, news reporters already use our data regularly. Cities already use our data, planners, engineers, nonprofits, all of that. But the entity that we're really going after is really trying to go straight to the fleet risk managers and really trying to build this out to be, like a mint.com, and really setting goals and objectives and really like tangible things for fleet risk managers. So we're branding it towards fleet risk managers, the way that, Bike Lane Uprising is really for bicyclists, Uprise is for fleet risk managers. We have massive data sets. So again, we have over 170 some million violations, inspection reports, billions and billions of data points. And again, reports, consulting, data portals, training. And the idea is, what if we could help companies reduce their insurance costs and also improve their safety at the same time? So instead of going straight after a stick approach, really going after a carrot approach. And then what if we could help companies really differentiate their services by safety? So much of companies, they're trying to win these contracts based on who's the cheapest, who's the fastest, right? And we know that those two criteria are a recipe for disaster when it comes to safety. And what if we can really help and reward employees that have those really good safe driving habits? So the same way that our data can be used to highlight unsafe drivers, it can also really be used to highlight folks that have like a great driving record. And it really allows companies a way to better leverage and reward the safe driving and potentially win contracts. Like, imagine these companies that are trying to get like maybe a city contract. We want companies that are safe to be getting our tax dollars and getting those contracts in our city centers, right? Like, we don't want unsafe companies, in our city centers in particular. And from that, right now, we are doing a deep dive. And our deep dive is really focusing on, we're starting with a small slice. And we're starting with companies that have been registered in Illinois with the United States Department of Transportation. We're looking at all of the companies and all of the crashes that have been involved with those entities since the beginning of the Department of Transportation holding these records, right? And from that, we're mapping out where those crashes are taking place. So just because a company is registered in Illinois doesn't mean that's where they're driving, right? They can be driving anywhere. And this is a map of where those crashes involving Illinois registered companies have taken place so far. And we're also looking at what types of crashes they're involved with, the fatal crashes versus the non-fatal, you name it. And we're also looking at, sending out legal notices to companies ahead of time and kind of forewarning them, because we are seeing, unfortunately, a correlation between the companies that have been in crashes. Again, we looked at the data. We are looking at, of those companies that are registered with the Illinois Department, or the Illinois U.S. Department of Transportation in Illinois, we're looking at, okay, of those companies, how many companies were there? How many repeat companies have been, in crashes? We're seeing that there's quite a few companies that have been in crashes repeatedly. Some of them were like within the same week they had multiple crashes with bicyclists. We're also investigating, of those companies, which ones have been reported to Bike Lane Uprising. And we're not even like halfway through our search. We have already seen a 50% match with companies that have been in crashes, registered in Illinois with the Department of Transportation, and them also being submitted to Bike Lane Uprising. So, that, kind of signal that we had to where like we're seeing companies involved with fatalities, we're seeing a correlation between these crashes and them also being reported to Bike Lane Uprising. And we're taking it a step further. We're looking at, okay, of those companies that have been in crashes, which ones have contracts with the city of Chicago? Which ones are actual vendors of the city of Chicago? And then of that, how much are those contracts for? And then how many contracts are there? Because we believe that's another avenue that could be utilized to better train people. And again, our goal is to begin issuing legal notices to the companies involved, letting them know that they have been reported to Bike Lane Uprising. And we're looking to figure out how to do that more on a large scale, not just in Illinois, but we're kind of starting with this kind of data sample and then looking at how we can expand it outside of that. And then also using it to leverage like better educating these companies and these drivers through our safety certification class. So again, sending the legal notice, letting them know that they have this problem. That legal notice now is something that can be used in court cases, should something happen. And but also hopefully that legal notice is enough to change the behavior of that company. And if they're interested in changing that behavior, letting them know, like potentially letting them know about the training that we have. And over the next year or so, we're going to be connecting the Bike Lane Uprising and the Uprise data further. So you're going to start to see that in the mobile app and that connection. Okay, so with that, any questions?
Thanks so much, Christina. This is really, really wonderful. And to think that you built this less than 8 years ago is really remarkable.
No
If you do
funding.
if you do have questions, feel free to use the Q&A feature. We have a couple here. Let's kick it off with this one. So one of our attendees asks, I'm curious about how city governments and planners use the data. What are the cities with the most bike lane obstructions? But do cities get sent the local reports? Do cities seem particularly eager to pay attention to the reports, or does it often get ignored?
Yes and no and everything.
Yeah.
There isn't just one answer to all of that. So I think there's a lot of questions in that. So let's chip away at it, right?
Yeah.
So how do cities use it? I have been told by multiple entities from multiple cities that they use our maps regularly. They use our database feed regularly to, kind of see where there's problems. Those photos are really helpful in allowing them to advocate for the infrastructure changes that they want. So you got to think, there's a lot of bicyclists that go into the transportation space. So there are actually bicyclists that are in these city government agencies that are struggling to prove why infrastructure should be included in these areas. So our maps and our database feed and all of that is stuff that they've been able to use and leverage to really do that. I have also heard from Department of Finances that they use our maps to send people out for, the day of where they're doing ticket writing. And as far as, do folks care or not care? Sometimes they don't care. And that's where, the advocacy allows us to push the needle. So there's some cities to where there's 311 systems or different things like that. And once that data is submitted, that data is dead. Like it's not going anywhere. And we've even heard from elected officials who have stated that that's the case. Our data, we did an audit one year. We actually found that the city of Chicago's 311 system had not been working since they launched it regarding bike lane obstructions, and nobody even knew. And what happens is every time you submit a bike lane obstruction, it gets auto closed. So nothing's being done about it, but it goes towards their KPIs showing of all the, tickets that they were able to get through, when really there's no chance of anything happening. So by us, housing the data, by us using the data, again, we're able to prove our point. So what was it, last weekend or the weekend before, I was getting text messages from reporters and they're like, hey, there's some things happening with the United States Postal Service. Somebody was hit. Do you have any points on that? And we were able to say, well, we've seen over 1,000 bike lane obstructions reported in Chicago alone involving the United States Postal Service. So, sometimes it's not just a one-off type of thing. And I think that's what a lot of bicyclists are looking for, is like, if I do this, I want to see X result. And that's just not the case, unfortunately. I think one of the questions that I've, seen is, would I have done this had I known? No, I wouldn't. Absolutely not. The amount of work that has to go into advocating and, just like proving our point and all of that, it's astronomical. It is disproportionate to the amount that we get out. So any impact that you're seeing coming out of our work means that we've done exponentially more work than we should have to get to that point. So it's not just if you do this, then this will happen, but we're starting to find more and more ways to do that. And that's where the legal notices come in, trying to get drivers to change their behavior, because when you can prevent that first bike lane obstruction from happening, you can prevent the rest of the bike lane from filling up. And the more people become comfortable with obstructing bike lanes, the more it gets other people comfortable with obstructing bike lanes. And it's just a snowball effect. So it's kind of like the Smokey the Bear thing, to where like only you can prevent forest fires, only you can prevent bike lane obstructions.
Absolutely. And to the work of advocacy being so much more exhaustive than it appears, I think this room full of bike advocates, I think we're all nodding our heads in agreement. On the topic of working with these commercial entities, why do you believe that market-based solutions are the key to keeping road users safe? Thinking about like risk management and insurance costs and companies using safety as a differentiator. And one of our attendees had the question, have you ever considered a professional accreditation like LEED for buildings? Like this is a safe driving company.
Yeah. So again, multiple questions in there. Let me try to unpack them. So market-based solutions. Why do I think that market-based solutions are the answer? I don't think it's the answer. I just think everybody's trying to grab at anything, any potential opportunity to make things better. And it's less about like, what is the solution? Again, there isn't a silver bullet solution. It's just like, what can we do to start having an impact ASAP, right? And a lot of folks, even when we were building the training, even our own volunteers were like, well, what if we could, maybe we can get the drivers to be advocates for the bike space. I was like, or maybe they could just stop parking in the bike lane and that solves it right there. Because if we can go straight to the source and just change their behavior, then we don't have to go through that whole entire flywheel,
Yeah.
right? That flywheel takes a really long time. It takes a lot of effort. It sucks up a lot of oxygen in the room and resources. What if we could just change the behavior without going through that flywheel, right? And as far as like the certification goes, that's kind of what the training's supposed to be. It's supposed to be an avenue in that direction, to where, think of a company that either, just safety is a part of their DNA, right? They're just going to want to do it because that's just who they are already, right? And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's a company to where like they've had problems specifically in this area, and they have to prove, how they can get their insurance to actually keep them, or to have some sort of an affordable option, right?
Mhm.
And that's what this training is. It's kind of the, different companies are going to be gravitating towards it and for different reasons, but the goal is to really let people understand the why, right?
Yeah.
So we went through really tangible solutions and tools to teach drivers, like, here's how you can do like planning and routing, and, like, here's some mapping things. So we're known for mapping. We shared some mapping tools for them. So
Um, Overnight, you are being deemed the next mayor of Chicago.
no,
How do you keep the bike lanes clear?
no. That is not a job that anybody, I think, envies. But I think again, there's a lot of different opportunities, right? So as of right now, most of the time, nobody's even paying attention to the bike lanes, right? So one of the things that have happened from our advocacy work is there's been pilot programs on automatic enforcement in some zones. I anticipate that's probably going to spread throughout the city of Chicago and some of these other areas. Again, we're seeing infrastructure being, actually improved in areas. It's slow, but by Chicago standards, it's faster than it was. But the rate at which the bicycling community is growing is outpacing it. So um, I think just as a whole, people don't want to just be getting in cars, and it's really changing how most elected officials anticipate people want to get around the cities. And what used to be a niche demographic is no longer a niche demographic. And one of the things, because we are an LLC and not a nonprofit, we can be as political as we want to be, and we have been as political as we wanted to be. And we've done voter guides, and we've shared, voting histories for, bicyclists as they went through it. And we've seen elected officials change their tune on how they addressed bicyclists and bicyclist issues. They realized that, oh, if I want to get reelected or elected, I need to actually be investing in this.
One of the many things that sets Bike Lane Uprising apart is your how deeply you worked with the tech community, the developer community. Why is that important?
I think it's just who I am. It's kind of like what my background is. So like making things is kind of my background. Our merch, like I come from like making things. So like it just is a part of it, right? And I was really naive in the beginning, and I thought that, oh, it's just bike lanes. They're real easy. You just got to build it. It's just concrete, and I didn't realize all of the political stuff. And what our maps and everything are being used for is it's essentially being like a shared service for bicyclists to prove their point, right? So it's not just a one-off type of, I have this unique complaint and it's only my complaint. The maps show that other people are having this complaint too, and that this is a much larger issue than what they realize. And the photos and just the rich data that is submitted along with the reports, it's proof. And what I have been told from one political office is that the problem with us is that we present the data in a way that can't be ignored.
I like that. Have you seen smaller cities and communities use Bike Lane Uprising for advocacy and change? Can you give an example?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the shared services model, right? So think if like think Lexington, Kentucky, right? They're avid users of our database. I was invited to speak at a conference there because of how much they use our database, and I showed up and immediately saw one of our stickers on somebody's bike, and I just thought that was like the craziest thing. And the person that was directing me to where I needed to go asked who I was with. And when I said Bike Lane Uprising, he goes, "Oh, we know all about you." And it was a city planner. And he like, so a city like Lexington, Kentucky isn't going to be able to create a bike lane uprising from scratch, right? And if they do, it's going to take up so much of the resources. Like it takes a lot of effort to build and maintain and just like keep bike lane uprising going. Even just keep it the way that it was when we first started it. That's a lot of work and a lot of expense and a lot of time. And for every single city to make their own version of it, that's so much time lost. Where that's what the advocacy cohort is for, is to teach advocacy leaders from all these different cities how to use our data and kind of benefit and learn from one another versus us all starting from scratch. And that's kind of what I had seen was happening, is everybody was starting from scratch. Nobody was really kind of like letting other folks like learn from what they had already figured out. And it was just a lot of like spinning our wheels over and over and over. So hopefully we're able to kind of all pool our resources and build on the momentum of one another.
Thank you. Yeah, we are out of time. So I guess in conclusion, thank you so much, Christina, for being here, for sharing this, for all your hard work with Bike Lane
Thanks for having me.
Uprising. Please download the app, follow Bike Lane Uprising on Blue Sky and on Instagram. Check out all of our upcoming webinars, bikeleague.org/webinars. This recording will be posted to our YouTube channel as well in the coming days. With that, thank you so much. Enjoy the
Thank
rest of
you.
this day.